Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Water Bear Reads. My name is Heather. I'm so glad you're here. I thought I would do a video to celebrate my collection of Jane Austens for Jane Austen July. I have my coffee here. I am doing my early morning filming once again. But anyway, so I'm gonna get my sip of coffee in, put my cup down, and then I will start showing you these beautiful books that I love so much. So the first Jane Austen that I want to show you is actually one that I have in my bathroom, and it's a little one, and it's called Jane Austen, Her Complete Novels in One Sitting, and it's adorable. My mother actually got it for me, and it's just too cute, and it has various illustrators. One of them is Hugh Thompson from his 1894 version. Those are quite famous. The end papers have been colorized, but that's his work. And then another one is C.E. Brock from his 1908 edition, and Chris Hammond from the, and if I'm not mistaken, I think Chris Hammond was the illustrator that was actually a lady. I'm gonna look that up real quick. Hang on. Yes, Christiana Hammond shortened her name to Chris Hammond, for obvious reasons, so that she could get equal pay and get a job to begin with and have her illustrations shown. And I'm so glad, because look how pretty they are. And I am so happy because I didn't realize that I have an illustration of hers. What a nice surprise. I came across Christiana Hammond, or Chris Hammond, a while back, and I've been looking for a good version, but I haven't been able to find one yet. So big surprise for me. I have a little illustration by her, and I'm sure there's more, but I'll look them up later and maybe put it in the comments if there's any more of her work in this little guy. But super cute. So the next one I want to tell you about, I picked up at Toppings in Bath. My mother and I traveled through the UK less than a year ago in September, and we had such a wonderful time. It was my first trip away from my son. I think we were gone for 9 days, so it was mixed emotions, but we just had a wonderful trip. And by the way, September is a beautiful time to visit England if you are ever thinking of traveling there. We explored Bath and went to the Roman baths, and we also hit up a couple of Jane Austen sites. Our first feel of real English soil was at Jane Austen's backyard.
It was there that we took in our first English garden and chuckled at the fat orange fuzzy bumblebees, different from the smaller yellow variety we get back home.
Jane Austen's home here in Hampshire was where she lived with her sister Cassandra for the last 8 years of her life. While we were in Bath, I ran into Toppings bookstore and I grabbed this adorable adapted version of Persuasion. Witty words by Narinder Dami and illustrated by Eglantine Soulemont. And it is just so cute. They have all 6 done. Eglantine illustrates all 6, I believe, but the writers are different in each one. I think it's so well made. And there they are. There's the other ones. And I want to collect them all. I love the colors, but here's some end papers. And I had a couple of illustrations I wanted to show you. The first one was how they wrote all the houses and named the houses. I love that the cob and lime was illustrated as well. I thought that was just really neat. Which, by the way, if you haven't seen the cob in film adaptations of Persuasion, you might also recognize it from The French Lieutenant's Woman with Meryl Streep and Jeremy Irons. And I think I also read that the new Willy Wonka, that there's a couple of scenes that were filmed at the cob. But anyway, so I just thought that was really cool. I really love the letter in here, that letter from Captain Wentworth. I thought it was really well done, beautifully written. It wasn't line for line. It was a little simplified, of course, but it still retained its magic, and I just thought that was amazing. And by the way, just in case you don't know this, Jane Austen almost didn't include that letter In Persuasion, she actually at some point realized that it needed a little bit more work, and she went back and added the letter, and I'm so glad because that is the most beautiful letter ever written in history. So the third of my adapted versions that I have on hand is Mansfield Park by Sweet Cherry Publishing Easy Classics series. I really love their books in this line. I have their Little Women and Jane Eyre as well. It's not done by a single illustrator. It's done by an agency of illustrators called Collaborative Illustrators, I believe, from what I understand. And they're all beautifully written. It left Mariah's downfall, but it didn't go into too much detail, and wrote it beautifully so that it was okay for a younger child. All right, so that's it for my adapted versions. In my last video, I showed you Jackie Oakley's illustrations for her collection of Jane Austen's. Jackie Oakley, once again, is the illustrator of a lot of the Ellen Montgomery books for Sourcefire books. I love her work and downloaded the Kindle version, which is perfect because sometimes I do actually need an e-version that I can read. Here's a couple from Sense and Sensibility. I have my ring light off so it doesn't show. And there's Marianne and Colonel Brandon. I don't have a copy of Mansfield Park. I've been trying to figure out which version of Mansfield Park I want to get. But I do have all of the others. I am one of those very strange people that prefers Mansfield Park to Emma. I know Emma is the popular choice and everyone tends to love Emma, but I just really love Mansfield Park. I really adore Fanny Price. I love her character, her strength of character. The one I want to show you first is Northanger Abbey. I decided this is the one I will read this month. Sea Wolf Publishing out in California makes these wonderful republications of classics with their original or early illustrators. This is a republication of the 1913 Macmillan edition, and this one is illustrated by Hugh Thompson, who was the first person to really capture the humor of Jane Austen's writing. If you know the version of Pride and Prejudice with the peacock on the cover, I'll put a picture of it up here so you can see. That would be Hugh Thompson's original 1894 version. He was also the first illustrator to illustrate her works prolifically, where it wasn't just a frontispiece and maybe a title page. It was many illustrations throughout. I think in this one, Northanger Abbey, there's 16, if I'm not mistaken, which is amazing for an early work because printing illustrations was an expensive venture. I read Emma last year for the first time, and I loved this version by Marjolaine Bastin. She does the Vera the Mouse series, and she also does a lot of work for Hallmark, and I just love her work. I love reading it this way because every time you turn the page, you don't really know what to expect on the next page. Get a beautiful picture of some birds, some beautiful botanicals with birds. One of the things I most enjoyed about this version of Emma, besides the beautiful nature watercolor illustrations throughout, was the extra ephemera that came with it. So, for example, here's a map of Highbury. And we've got the letter that Jane Austen wrote to, I believe it's her publisher. I'll read this part to you because I just thought it was so interesting. My greatest anxiety at present is that this fourth work should not disgrace what was good in the others. But on this point I will do myself the justice to declare that whatever may be my wishes for its success, I am strongly haunted with the idea that to these readers who have preferred Pride and Prejudice, it will appear inferior in wit, and to those who have preferred Mansfield Park, inferior in good sense. I thought that was really interesting. She's got Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility out in the Jane Austens, and then Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights, as well as Little Women. My copy of Sense and Sensibility, illustrated by Nate or Nirut Prutapipat, who is a British Thai illustrator, and they did the most remarkable work I've ever seen. The illustrations are just exquisite. Willoughby and Marianne. I also love that they included silhouettes, which were quite popular during the time of Jane Austen. This version was published for the Bath 200th anniversary of the publication of Sense and Sensibility, which was published in 1811. Nate also illustrated several of Jane Austen's other works for the Folio Society, which I have one other I'm going to show to you. Here is their version of Pride and Prejudice that they did for the Folio Society in 2006. And I think it's also beautiful. And there's one of the illustrations inside. I love that scene where Elizabeth stands up to Lady Catherine de Bourgh. But anyway, so yeah, just exquisite work. So proud to own these. And I'd like to collect their version of Persuasion, because as far as I'm concerned, you cannot have too many versions of Persuasion. So I have a couple of versions of Pride and Prejudice, and this is my other version. My mom gifted to me, and I love it. It's so beautiful. It's by Barbara Heller, who I believe is based in New York. And I love that it has these beautiful peacock edges, which are a nod to the Hugh Thompson version that I spoke of earlier. It's not illustrated, but there's so much work that has gone into this version that in my book I would consider it illustrated. It's definitely a work of art. It has tons of letters and other ephemera from the time period, and I pulled out a couple that I thought were really cool. So when Lydia runs away with Wickham, she writes her friend Harriet a letter explaining where she's gone, and she writes it on the back of this, looks like a fashion pamphlet for the time period. I just thought that was really cute. It's very much like Lydia. And then the other thing I wanted to show you is when Elizabeth is touring the country with her aunt and uncle, and she gets sent Jane's letters discussing how Lydia has run away with Wickham. She gets her 2 letters, and then this one is particularly interesting. Oh, and look at this. You can see where the wax mark would have gone, and they're artificially aged, so they look very authentic. It begins with everything being nice and normal. My dear Elizabeth, please tell my aunt and uncle how the little gardeners delight us and distract us from the quiet left by your absence. And it goes on. And then suddenly you get the other part where it says, since writing the above, dearest Lizzie, something has occurred of the most unexpected and serious nature. And you can see the difference in her handwriting. So here it's all nice and neat and relaxed, and then down here it becomes very messy and more difficult to read. I just find that really interesting. Just a really beautiful version. And Barbara Heller is such a nice person. I've chatted with her about some children's books on Instagram. She was telling me one of her favorite books that she's read, which I forget the name of it at the moment. I'll put it up here, but it was one of her favorites from her childhood, and she was telling me about that. But she's just a lovely person. I really love this so much. It's such a treasure. So now we get to my favorite Jane Austen, and that is Persuasion. The first one I wanted to show you was the Folio Society version from 2016, and that is illustrated by Deanna Staffo. I hope I'm saying her name right. She is an American illustrator who grew up in the Appalachian Mountains of Kentucky, and I looked up her website, which I'll put a link below. She's done a lot of fashion illustrations, and what I also found interesting was she'd illustrated another book for the Folio Society. It's Susan Coolidge's What Katie Did, and the illustrations are just beautiful. And I also found that she did this really cute book called The Bridgerton Book of Afternoon Tea. So here's an illustration of Captain Wentworth, and this is the only illustrated page which on the other side is another illustration, but this is that moment where Captain Wentworth leaves her the letter and then she reads it, and it's just such a wonderful part of the book. When you go through the whole story and then you get to that point, such a thrill, I can't tell you. And oh, that letter is just the most amazing letter ever written. It's just fantastic. The next copy of Persuasion hailed from the Jane Austen house itself. My mom purchased this for me at the Jane Austen House gift shop, and it is a vintage version of Persuasion, illustrated by John Austen, no relation, and I just thought it was so cool looking. There's these beautiful, delicate wonderfully colored illustrations throughout, and I really love this version. Jane Austen illustrated several Charles Dickens and Shakespeare's. This was published privately in 1944 and then published by Avalon Press in 1946. His final work was Persuasion, which I thought was interesting because it was also Jane Austen's final completed work. I love Persuasion for so many reasons, but I think the reason I love it the most, there's something about this book that just really shows who Jane Austen is. There's something that just really ties her to everyone in this book. I really love Anne's character. I think she's such a strong, understated person. But yeah, so it's not the prettiest. I mean, there's no cover or anything, but I took a picture of this with Jane Austen's desk in the background. I kind of balanced it on this little frame that was going around her desk. But I was just so proud of it. Thank you, Mom. Speaking of my mom, she also gifted me this beautiful cookbook that was inspired by the works of Jane Austen. And it's by Robert Tousley Anderson and published by Thunder Bay Press 2021. There's no illustrator that's really mentioned in it, but there are tons of illustrations by Hugh Thompson. And I just really love it. Like, each section has some history given on how people during the Regency period would attend to the certain types of meals, like when breakfast was usually eaten, and the differences between picnics of today and picnics of the past. And the recipes themselves are really scrumptious looking. Frank Churchill's cardamom coffee. Oh, that looks so good, doesn't it? And uppercross mushroom pies. Oh my gosh, this just makes my mouth water just looking at it. But yeah, so I love the illustrations. It has all these beautiful florals throughout. And also every section has a little sort of anecdote from one of the Jane Austen novels, like Mr. Woodhouse's All Apple Tarts. In the village of Highbury, Emma's Mr. Woodhouse always has the last word on what is healthy and unhealthy when it comes to food, and perhaps, surprisingly, apple tart is one of the dishes that passes muster. The final book I wanted to share with you is The Other Bennett Sister by Janice Hadlow. My mom and I read this while we were traveling through the UK. We listened to it on audio, and we kind of listened to it on the plane. It was kind of funny because we sat next to each other. We each had our own piece of the headset. I thought it was so good. Mary's lacking confidence, and she's always kind of been the forgotten sister. And things happen in the book that make her feel valuable. It starts off in the Pride and Prejudice story, and the first third of the book is her perspective of events that have happened. But then after Lizzie and Jane's wedding, things kind of take off, and Mary finds herself in a situation where she's living in other people's homes, trying to figure out where she belongs. She stays with Jane for a little while, she stays with Lizzie for a little while, and she stays with Charlotte Lucas, who actually becomes a friend of hers, which I thought I really enjoyed that part of the story. I loved that it kind of touched on certain questions that we have in Pride and Prejudice, like what would have happened if she had ended up with Mr. Collins. It's a great book to pick because it takes you throughout England as Mary travels from place to place in England on her own voyage of discovery, where she sort of goes from being timid and lacking in confidence to realizing her own value and her own intelligence, and finds romance herself. Well, that's it for my Jane Austen collection. If you have any thoughts as to which versions of Mansfield Park I should go with, let me know, because that's the one that I'm missing from my collection that I'd really like to add. I hope you're having a wonderful season. I will be taking a little bit of a break from YouTube for a couple of weeks. I need to change my focus onto my Summer Illustrator Explorer. On my website, I tend to choose a classic that I focus on that season, and then I do a blog post on all the various illustrators of that classic. So I have my summer classic coming up, and it's a very exciting one because I was given permission to photograph at the author's home, which I was really excited about because I didn't even realize that this author had ever set foot in the United States, let alone wrote some of their most famous works here. I'm heading out there on Monday, so that's going to be fun. So follow me on Instagram, I'll keep you updated. I do offer a sneak peek, if you subscribe on my website, into the next classic that I plan to explore. I hope you have a wonderful day. Talk to you soon. Bye.